right, so I am super grateful to have Dr. Megel Barker on our show today. Dr. Megel and I go back a little bit. We actually met in the Middle East in Dubai at a conference. We were both featured speakers, and we have been truly brothers ever since. And I'm super grateful that he was willing to come on the show. He was working as a school administrator in the beautiful country of Oman, and I was working in the Middle East myself in Kuwait as a school principal. And we just really connected, and I've just seen so many great things from Dr. Megel since that time, and we've kept in touch. He is now a principal in the UK at a boarding school, and we're super happy to have him on the show. And I'm going to be quiet and allow him to share his K-12 journey with us. How you doing, Dr. Megel?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to some great conversations. So
100%. We always have great conversations together. So I'm super happy that you're on the show. I was just sharing a little bit about your K-12 journey and how we met. Can you go back to the beginning and how you got into K-12 education?
Well, I mean, the beginning is all the way back to 1994.
Oh, wow.
So, and that does not describe how I got into it. It does describe the day when I started as a professional in the classroom. But I got into it because one of my teachers said I needed to do something with my life at age 17. So when I left high school, I didn't really have a high quality profile in the sense of doing well in school. So, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And so while I had a lot of ability, I did not have a lot of attainment to show for it for many reasons. So my teacher said, why not send him to a teacher's college back in Jamaica? And I told my mother that, and my mother said, okay, let's send him to teacher's college. And at the time, there was a shortage of males to be in teaching profession. So the entry requirements then were quite lenient, so to speak, at least to allow us in and then get our qualifications up and then join the teaching program. And so I got into that program, and in 1994, I graduated as a teacher and been in the profession since, and that has taken me across teaching in Jamaica for a while, up to about 2002. And then I went to the UK, did 10 years in the state comprehensive system, and then to Oman. And that's where our paths crossed one day in Dubai. And we have been great friends since. And our journey has been, in many ways, learning from each other. So that's my K-12 journey in terms of
Doc, I did not realize we've known each other for a while. We actually started the exact same year, 1994, 28 years ago. Hard to believe, brother. It goes quick.
It goes quick.
Yeah.
It goes quick.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've always believed that K-12 education, at least for me, was a calling. Yes, it's a job, and yes, it's, helps me take care of my family and my responsibilities. But how do you look at K-12 education?
Well, I think the people who work in that space have to have a calling, because the job requirement doesn't match what the job function is, in terms of, you say you're a teacher, but the role itself requires a lot more involvement than just going in front of a class and teaching. And even if the focus is on teaching, the preparation and the reflection that is required, it's a lot more time than just walking into work and leaving work. So anyone who is in that role knows that the job doesn't start at 8 o'clock and finish at 4 o'clock. It's a job that is involved, fully involved. So in that sense, I think K-12 is really a calling, and it's really a real opportunity in anyone's life to be able to say without any fear of a contradiction that they have impacted many people's lives. Because in any one classroom setting, there are a lot of young, impressionable minds that are waiting for the opportunity to be molded into the right kind of people. And that's what happens when you say K-12, but there are certain points in that. For example, I'd say certainly in middle school, where I'm more focused now, where that impact has a real kind of pivotal role in students' lives. And so anyone who is in that kind of position can determine futures, really how students see the future. So across the spectrum, it's a real, more than a vocation, it's really a commitment to service.
Yeah, very well said. Now, when I look at you, Dr. Miguel, I truly see an international educator, right? You started in your home country of Jamaica, where your roots are, but you've also worked in the UK, then you worked in the Middle East, and now you're back in the UK. What's that journey been like? I had the opportunity to work abroad for a couple of years, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that are watching us right now that are like, wow, you got two brothers on here. They've worked abroad and they've lived abroad. And what would you say to people that are thinking about potentially working abroad?
Well, if I could go back to the time when I came overseas, the journey, I hardly recognize a person who left the UK 10 years ago.
Wow.
Simply because, when you're working in state school systems, it's hard to notice how much the decisions you take, the mindset that you have are shaped by government policy and by a view of how learning should be.
Okay.
So when I left the UK, my focus was on raising standards, but raising standards simply meant getting more kids just with a different grade, a better grade. And it was to get from one stage of the education system to the next. By the time I came into the international scene, I began to see that there was a lot more need for educators to focus on the whole child, the whole, the emotional aspect, the developmental aspects of children, and not necessarily just to get them to jump through hoops, but simply to develop their character. And that was not a feature of the state system. So when you start to work overseas, because the people that you're working with and the students you're working with quite likely are, in many cases, the parents are, well-to-do parents,
Sure.
the expectation from an education is not only for them to be able to pass an exam, because
Sure.
they could get that in their own systems. What they're looking for when they say they want an international education, they're looking for something far more democratized, and a different kind of education system. And so for me as an educator, when I got into international education, it really opened my mind about what was possible in education. And the things that, in some ways, the things that I thought about doing as an educator in the normal school system, which was maybe pushing against what was dogma. When I come into international education, that was the expectation.
Wow. That's interesting. You are so right. Like, I never really thought about it like that, but you're correct. Like, why would a parent or parents choose to put their child in a private school? Their tax dollars are already paying for public education, but they choose to use extra dollars to put their child in a private school when, like you said, they can get the basics, even if they stayed in a public institution, but they choose to, in a lot of ways, educate the whole child, right? By providing them not only with the basic education, but a whole breadth of experiences. And that's powerful, man. Yeah. That's interesting. Now, your wife is an educator too, right?
Yep.
Okay. So your wife is an educator. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. She's a counselor, right?
So, she started off as a teacher and was a head of English, and then eventually move into a space that was available, which was to do college counseling, which really utilizes her English skills, because there's a lot of essay writing, a lot of support for students and their expression of self. And so she transitioned into that kind of role eventually, and is now maybe a full-time career. That's her career at the moment.
That's cool. So you have 3 children, right?
Yeah.
Well, at least 3 children at home.
Right?
Yeah. And so how was living abroad for your children? Like, what were the benefits of, working abroad, obviously as an educator for you and your wife, but also your children? How did they benefit from those experiences?
Well, for one, working overseas, they're living in a different country. So there's a lot for them to absorb there. They're living in a culture. They're beginning to see that the world is bigger than just the world that maybe if you're born in a country, you tend to think of the world through that lens, right?
Sure.
When you're living overseas, right away, you're living in a space where you know that this is another space you're occupying. So they grew up with that awareness that the world is bigger than just the country that they live in.
Yeah.
The second part of it is if they're in an international setting like my children, and I always say this to my middle school students anyway, that in any classroom, you're living almost like the United Nations. You take a classroom of 22 kids and you might have 15, 16 nationalities.
That's true.
A school like the one that we were in, there were 75 nationalities across the school. So that kind of a world experience of having friendship groups that might have 5 or 6 different nationalities and speaking different languages is powerful. It cannot be taught. It cannot be. The only way you can really gain value from that is to live and be immersed in that, because for them, that is normal. So imagine my children a few years later working on a global corporation that requires them to work with teams that have people from different countries. For them, that's normal.
Yeah.
While many people would have to be trained to work in those spaces. So for me, as a parent, I'm thinking like, I'm giving them life lessons that, you couldn't pay for that, so that kind of experience is invaluable for them as learners. And the fact is, we're preparing them for a future that is certainly going to be far more connected than the one that, we grew up in. So for me, for parents, this is a real value. The friendship groups. And on top of that, we also become immersed in friendship groups that your kids, more than their friendship groups, they begin to be able to taste other foods and see what other cultures look like. So, and then because you're overseas as well, you travel a lot more. You've been to so many countries because we're in the middle of, that's the nature of the space. You're like, where do we go next? And then you know so many people from so many countries that you visit those places and meet those people. And I mean, even us, between us, our families connected through the international space in Oman. So there's a lot that happens all the time.
Yeah, that's so powerful. You're right, man. I'm just sitting up here with a smile on my face, man, because, we were only abroad for 2 years, man. We went to 12 different countries. Like you said, right there in the Middle East, you're literally no more than 6 hours from 3 different continents, right?
Yeah,
talking about Africa, Asia, Europe. It's just amazing, the travel benefits, and it's very economical. You're so right. And I've always said a mind expanded can never return to its original form, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that, like you said, your children have friends, I'm sure that they even keep up with now. Even though they're back in the UK, they have friends that are still in Oman that they keep up with, probably from different nationalities. My son is the same way. My daughter was kind of young when we were there, but he still keeps up with friends from Kuwait that he was friends with, and they were from different countries, Australia, Kuwait, you name it. So yeah, it's just really beneficial. You're so right, man. There's so many benefits to living and working abroad. But now you're back in the UK. Do you feel like you've gone back home in a sense? I mean, I know you are back home, but how does it feel coming back? Because you're not coming back to a state school, you're coming back to an international school. Can you share what that's been like?
How to describe that? I suppose the only comparison would be that I maybe was going to come back into the state system at some point. So not being able to come to that allows me to have that kind of reflection about the difference between the two. But the reality of it, because my school now is an international school as well, when I come into this school, the environment feels the same. It's an American curriculum, but because the role I'm coming into is still working with people and not necessarily knowledge based, in a sense, what happens is that I'm relying on people to guide me through the knowledge pieces, but the leadership aspects are still the same. You're going to have to build relationships with people. You're going to have to lead teams that are of many different nationalities. You're going to have to consider the different cultural dispositions. You're going to have to respect the way that the institution did things. You're going to have to find a way to move the institution forward by adding value. So coming into the UK from that perspective was kind of the same. I think what's different for us is where we're living now and how our proximity to the school compared to what life was before that. So before that, we would have our kids in different schools. So we would be driving off and we'd be dropping children off in different places. And it pretty much is not the expectation that in the UK, you'd have your child in the same school that you teach. It's just not a thing. no one wants that anyway. And so coming back into the UK, but being in a scenario where not only are my kids in the same school, but my wife works there as well, is new. In the UK, that is new, and so it's great to have that, because that's something you have normally in an international school space for the most part. But here, that would be something that would have been almost impossible, but we have that. And that allows me to have a higher quality of life compared to the quality that I would have had normally coming back into the UK, because I'd spend hours just traveling and dropping kids off and picking kids up. At least now we're finished and we're home pretty much maybe 5 minutes afterwards, we're in our home. So it does allow us to spend a lot more time together and do what we were doing internationally, So that difference is really obvious to me, What is interesting is not a lot of people are aware of the international scene in the UK. When we came to the UK and came back into our role, a lot of people are like, even teachers that were in my team who were of UK origin were like, really? They didn't even think of it like in that way. So in some ways we're setting trends for people who are actually UK origin, and we're coming back and they're like, really, I didn't know that you could come back into an international school like that in the UK. So yeah, that's the biggest difference for me in terms of a comparison to the life in terms of our lifestyle. Because when you're coming from the international school system, you're kind of used to a lifestyle. Sure. And if you lose that, it does make a big difference, So when we came back and could secure that lifestyle, we kind of felt, I think that's our biggest win, being able to secure the lifestyle of having more time with family than before.
That's good. Do you see yourself still traveling a lot?
Well, we did a lot of traveling when we were overseas, a lot. Yeah, I still would like to travel. But part of the traveling when we were international was linked to the fact that we were away from what is considered to be home. And so you would want to do something, kind of justify the fact that you're living away from home. Now that we're home, it's like traveling now feels more like going on a holiday. And then you kind of think, do you really want to go on a holiday all the time? Because this is home. So we're trying to kind of spend more time traveling in the UK, visiting, some of the ancient sites and getting our kids as well acculturated, in some ways, into the UK. So the travel bug isn't there yet, but we're still 2 or 3 months in. So
yeah, you still have time for sure. Yeah. So what grade are your children in?
So one is in grade 6, grade 8, and another one in early years 2. So it's like a K2, K3 kind of vibe there. Yeah.
That's cool. That's really cool.
But they're loving it. They're loving coming back. It's colder, obviously, but
they'll get used to it.
Yeah, they'll get used to it. We wrap them warmly. Yeah.
Yeah. I had the opportunity for the first time to visit the UK, and it was interesting. It's just, I've always had this saying, nothing really changes but the faces and the places, Yeah. And it was really cool though. I was, when you think about America, there's so many traditions and customs and things that we do here that obviously originated in England. So it was really cool to have that opportunity to visit for a few days. And I definitely want to come back and visit you guys, and would love to come and visit your school.
Oh, you should. You should. That would be an amazing opportunity. I think one of the things we need to think about is maybe some connections between the schools as well.
Oh yeah, that would be cool.
That would be cool if we could find a way to connect students in different parts of the world,
Yeah.
Talking about some issues and seeing how different students, like in the US, how are they viewing a similar incident? And maybe that's one way we can measure the impact of the environments on the opinions that students hold,
I love that.
Because we say that the international students think a different way, but do they?
Do they really?
You don't know.
You're right. That's a very good point. No, I would love that. Yeah, we need to make that happen.
That'd be cool. So we need to look at that,
Yeah.
We need to do that at some point.
So tell me more about your school that you're at right now. It's a boarding school, and I've never worked as a boarding school teacher or administrator, and I'm sure a lot of our people that are watching us right now have not either. What's it like? Like, what would be some of the similarities?
Well, for one, it's a beautiful school.
Yeah.
It's really a beautiful environment. The school is set almost on an estate in that sense. Massive, lots of grounds. We have ponds, we have lots of fields. There's a lot of greenery around. The buildings, for the most part, are 15th century, 16th century, lots
Wow.
of old buildings are here. Once you walk in, you'll see those buildings. They're in good condition, but you can see, you feel the history of the building, the walls, everything. It's set in a beautiful little village. So there's a lot there for anyone. But in terms of, so because it's a boarding school, what happens is that boarding begins at grade 8. So like for me in a middle school environment, some of my grade 8s actually board. We do have a day school program as well.
Oh, okay.
Beyond that, a lot of students come in the day and leave in the day, but they live locally. They would maybe live locally. It's a typical expatriate kind of environment where families are here because they work in either in oil or in big companies, ranging from anything, banking all the way through. So so our population is transient in that sense. Families will leave because contracts are up or they need to be transferred to another part of the world.
Okay.
But in terms of school culture, beautiful. It's a caring environment. The culture is great fun. The kids love each other. There's, it's really a nice place to be, and we have found that so welcoming when we came in. It's, England is a cold place, but TASIS is warm, really warm.
Wow. So yeah, what would, do you see yourself staying in that type of space, or do you see yourself at any point going back to like a?
All right. I mean, it's 2 months in.
Well, that's a good point.
yeah, it's 2 months on. I think at the moment, the way that I'm looking at it is that this is a great space. I feel I can add value to what I'm doing here. Things I really want to do is look at, how we can in some ways, bring in more inquiry-driven approaches to education and, make it more authentic, make it a little bit more real life, allowing students to feel like learning is not just about covering the curriculum, but discovering it. So I still have a job to do in that sense. In terms of me as a person, I mean, at the moment, this is what I do, but what I'm trying to do is ensuring that I don't do only one thing at a time. So just recently, about 2 weeks ago, we just published a piece of research. So I've just completed a chapter in a book that was published recently, and that was original research that was conducted with another friend of mine, Dr. Shannon Bruce Ramaka. So during COVID, we investigated the manner in which school leaders activated their middle leaders during COVID-19. So we wanted to see whether this was an intentional process or is it just something that happened? Because we just wanted to see what was the lived experiences of middle level leaders in the crisis, but we focused on international school. And so that research required us to interview 13 heads of schools.
Okay.
And we only focused on that perspective. We just asked them what did they do during the crisis. For the most part, they weren't aware of what we were really looking at. And then we kind of looked to see how they were speaking about the deployment of their middle leaders as they dealt with the crisis. And some interesting findings, really, really interesting findings coming out. So we wrote that down, and so that got published in a book that was released recently.
Okay.
That chapter. So it's a great read. I'm hoping that listeners will go and find that book and read a little bit about that, because we just found some great stuff. I think one thing that came out of that was that it was not intentional. Like, people don't really think deeply about how they're going to use their middle leaders. And in a crisis, the roles became clearer, but even then it wasn't so intentional. It was a case of just people had to just do their jobs.
Yeah.
But at least the roles became clearer, because middle leaders always suffer from a lack of clarity.
That's
right?
true.
So there was clarity out of that, but in one sense, it was just because the crisis was present, rather than people saying we needed to make it clearer so that we would respond to the crisis. It just happened. So there's a lot from that. But there are other things we picked up as we spoke to heads of schools as well. Like many heads of schools are now literally asking to have a professional coach.
Okay.
as a part of their contracts.
Okay.
And that's
Love it.
something that that is interesting, isn't it? Because when you get into these roles and even schools, I mean, it is not uncommon for executives to have professional coach.
For
You know,
sure.
if you're an executive working in a company like Bloomberg or something like that, you would have a coach, a
Absolutely.
professional, because it is important that you are given the tools in order to be successful in such a demanding role. And having a professional coach is someone who will help you to understand yourself and learn how to utilize your strengths in order to be effective. But schools are not like that.
That's
It's just
true.
not. You
You're
put you
right.
into a
You're right.
senior role. No one's thinking, and Dr. Joe, we've gotten you into a high school principal role and go for it. But also, here
Yeah.
is your professional coach, or you need to have a professional coach and you need to meet with that person twice a month just to discuss and make sure that you're on the right track. It's not happening. It's not the way schools function. But you are in a role, you know,
No,
you
you're
need,
right.
you
Right.
need that.
I not only do I need it, I've started doing it. Like I shout out to Anna Westland out of Wisconsin. She was my coach last year, former principal in St. Louis, Missouri, and I got a lot out of it, man. It was really good. And so honestly, I'm supposed to be starting a coaching cycle. I call them cycles, coaching cycle.
Yeah.
And when I say coaching cycle, I'm talking 8 to 12 weeks, where I'm just really immersing myself with this particular coach. So there's a superintendent that I connected with out of Texas. And we were actually scheduled to start a couple of weeks ago, but we had just started school here. We started in September and it wasn't a good time for me to start it. But yeah, I'm actually going to be starting a coaching cycle with him.
Yeah, but I think it's something that it's worth ventilating, you know, the idea of school leaders as part of their appointment being given support, not of their senior leadership team, not of their superintendent, but a professional coach that works with them in order to develop their capacity to be effective leaders, because it is a given. And if you think about it, Joe, and I know we can talk about that, most of us actually get promoted into a role that we haven't done before, in the sense of you're a teacher first,
Sure.
then you're asked to become an AP, but you
Yeah.
have never done any functioning like that before. And then
Sure.
you're expected to function effectively in that role with no support except doing well.
Yep.
You
Good
don't
point.
do well, you go right back into the ranks or you leave the profession, right? Then you get promoted into a principal role, which effectively is a whole different functioning from an AP. You're making decisions, it's a different role. But again, you don't have a coach. So look at a professional football player. They're at the top of their game. They have all the skill sets to make them a professional, but they need a coach in order to improve.
That's true.
So I believe it's a serious gap that exists in education and why we have that regular turnstile of people coming in and going out. We do not have a strategy in education that says, I appoint you into this role and you're also going to have, you can pick from this group, but you're going to have a professional executive coach that will work with you just to help you through the lonely times and the big decisions.
Okay.
Every day. And that's something that maybe we can take from this, but
no, I
it's
like
something
that.
I feel strongly about, you know, and it came through. Some people are doing it on their own. And some people, as you know, will find a friend that they will work with. But in reality, it should be an investment in any organization to provide this to their leaders so that their leaders can even use the value of coaching to implement that in their own.
No, I like what you said about that. I because you're right. You said something that I really agree with, in the sense that not only do leaders, school leaders, and I'll just use school leaders, no matter what level, principal, AP, district level, heads of schools, directors, yeah, they definitely need a coach, but I agree with you. I don't think it necessarily needs to be someone that's in that organization, right?
No, it shouldn't. In fact, it shouldn't be.
It should
And
be,
that's the
right?
problem.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the problem is that's mentoring. You see, the problem is
Good point.
schools want
Good
to assign a
differentiation.
coach that is in exactly. You really need to be providing coaches to your leaders, yeah, and mentors to the other members of your team to develop them. You give them job alikes, people that work in a similar role to help them, yeah. But a coach doesn't even have to be an educator, because
You're
your
right.
coach is not there to help you to be an educator. It's working on your leadership skills
Sure.
and your self-awareness. It's
Absolutely.
allowing you to develop that skill of being reflective, and having someone who has nothing to do with education or even as skilled at leadership as you, but they're good at coaching, is important, because
Love it.
they'll ask you the questions that allow you to look at yourself and say, this is where I need to grow. And that's why that's needed, you know?
That's powerful. That's really powerful. We're definitely going to continue this conversation off of this interview, because my mind is spinning. I know your mind is spinning, and we're like iron sharpening iron in that regard. So yeah, I can definitely see where that's not only is it needed, but who's providing it? You know what I mean? Like, it's not being provided. I don't know of any organizations that say, hey, you know what? We're in the business of just providing coaches to school leaders for private schools or school districts, or, to me, those kind of things need to be done at scale. Because like you said, there are people like myself that take it upon themselves to find coaches, but I don't know how sustainable that is, because it's not cheap, right?
Exactly,
You know,
exactly.
and so it's like, how do we provide a service like that where, like you said, our leaders can develop their skills, they can share the certain things or what's going on in their position without any worry about repercussions or anything like that, that they can truly, for lack of a better term, be transparent in where they are and not worry about that affecting their job. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And
yeah,
so,
exactly,
no,
exactly. The vulnerability carries a high risk to it.
for sure. Absolutely.
I mean, can you walk into a meeting and say, I have this really difficult situation in my head and I'm looking at both options and I'm really scared to make a decision here because I don't know what's going to happen. Who can you say that to in your
Yeah,
organization?
that's the thing. Who
Yeah,
can you say it to, right?
because you don't know if you're going to be judged as saying, you know what,
You're weak.
he doesn't have the guts to make a big decision, or, he's indecisive, but a professional coach can go back and ask you other questions that tries to figure out what is your where are you at a fork? What is it that is asking you? What is it you're worried about? And
Sure.
in many ways, once you walk through that process, you might realize that maybe the things that you fear aren't things to be feared.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm reading a book now called The Courage to be Disliked.
Okay.
It's an interesting book, and it's written from a oh God, there's some interesting things happening, man. We're reading a lot more. I'm reading a lot more Eastern philosophy type
Okay.
books. It just gives you a whole different perspective on leadership, But it's a
No,
nice
that's
book.
good. No, that's
It
good. The courage to
literally
be liked.
goes courage to be disliked,
To be
and it's
disliked. Yes.
be
Okay.
disliked. Yeah.
Mm.
Imagine that, right? Let that simmer a little bit, the
Yeah.
idea of, because that's what leadership is, right?
It really is. It really is. Like, I mean, you have to have the courage to make the tough decisions, and you have to have those courageous conversations. And yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a very powerful title, and I would love to read that book. I'm actually going to Google it. I'll put it in the show notes for our viewers
It's
and
a really
listeners
nice
so they
book.
can,
It's a really nice read.
yeah.
It's an easy read as well because it's written in a conversational, like there's a philosopher and there's someone asking him a question and he's walking them through a process, but you are being walked through that process as well.
Okay.
But it's a Japanese writer, and that kind of philosophy is really a powerful way of, and in many ways, the way the book is written, it's that it goes against the Freudian view where your past is determining who you are now. Because
No,
that's
I agree. Yeah.
Freudian view of the psychoanalytic view, is that who you are now is based on a thing that happened to you or you experienced in your past. And so they go backwards to find that point. While this kind of philosophy says, you can shape the future from now, but you have to have a different kind of mindset that the past has no impact on what happened. You can shape that now by shifting your entire mind. It's about habits. It's about, and less about what happened to you in the past. So it's an interesting book to read, because it maybe aligns more with my view as well, that we can shape our future irrespective of what,
That's really, really good. Thank you for sharing that. I'm definitely going to read that book because, again, I'm always trying to expand my mind, because at the end of the day, I'm a lifelong learner, and I feel like I have a lot that I can continue to learn in this profession. But also I feel like I have a lot to learn about me, because a lot of times I think we can be our own worst enemy as it relates to moving forward and breaking through barriers. And like you said, changing that mindset as it relates to how we think, and not bringing in what I call the shackles of the past, you know what I mean, that truly hinder our future a lot of times. So
it's powerful, man. It's a powerful place to be, and leading into is a powerful place.
But that's a good segue into my final topic of our conversation is, like, I know you have your own podcast, and I just started it, and maybe you can share a little bit with our viewers about what you're doing, because I definitely want to plug your podcast and eventually even be a guest on your podcast.
No, I'd love to have you on.
Yeah.
So my podcast is maybe, so the thing is, I have always wanted to write a book. So this is the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have maybe about 10 different ideas that I'm working on my laptop that, I have different versions of it. And I'm still struggling to bring that together into a book. So I've watched a few podcasts, I've talked to a few people, I've seen people finish their book. And then one day it came to me, the idea, maybe I could learn from people who actually overcome that barrier, publish a book. And so my podcast really is an investigation into how people get to the point of writing their book, so that I can develop the courage to complete my book.
Love it. Love it. No,
it's called Your Book, Your Story. I've just did it on like Spotify and so on. I'm still just doing episodes of those and sharing those with friends to get a feel of how the flow is and the quality of the audio and so on. But even since I've started, I'm just learning a lot. I mean, one person who listened to it said to me that once they listened to the first episode, she said to me that she had written a book before, because I wanted to interview her as well. And she was thinking of writing another book, but having listened to this, she said she's going back to her old book to write a second edition of that book, and listening to the podcast got her going. She just went, I'm going to get going on that book again. So in many ways, it is more my own journey of trying to become an author. And I'm just trying I'm just making sure that I am collecting as much information. But the second level of that is also to help many of my friends who are authors who have written their books and they're now just in a corner. And so the podcast is a platform for them to come and talk about their books, get a chance to tell the story around their books, and then it represents a promotional material for them to share with people, to say, here is a little bit more about my book, and maybe it can energize maybe a book that was sitting in a bookshelf or somewhere in a cobwebbed virtual space that no one will look at. So a lot of wins are there, in the sense that people can take that podcast and say, hey, listen to this, and maybe you want to buy my book, Yeah. But for me as well, I'm walking away from that learning every day, because that's the whole point, So it's and I'm also learning to podcast as well. I'm watching videos and learning to edit and learning to do all that stuff. So for me, it's another thing. Yeah. And so I reach out to everyone I know that has published a book and just say, come on, tell me your story. It's called Your Book, Your Story.
Your Book, Your Story.
Look out for it, because anyone who has a book, and every book has a story behind it. So
100%.
I want to find out about the people, how you get to the point where you wrote a book. I was interviewing another friend of mine, someone who I met online, and he's fired up Geez, I'll send you that one now. And, he's going around, he's wrote a book, What Success Look Like, and it's amazing. A lovely conversation as well. So
No, that's good.
I'll be coming for you, Dr. Joe.
100%. I'm excited about it. Yeah, I believe everybody, I actually heard you say this on your podcast, everybody has a book within them. I believe that. Also, if you break down that word history, his story, everybody has a story to tell. So no, I agree, man. And yeah, I'm happy to share with you. I actually wrote a book about my mother's life.
That would be a lovely book to tell us the story, us the story.
100%. So I would love to come on your show and just talk about how that came about, because that was a unique, like you said, every book has a story behind it in it of itself, right? And so
and there's a creation process that, and the other level is, if you are an author or someone like me who wanted to publish a book, the idea is that you'd live through people's stories and different challenges, and that might motivate you to say, hey, my boundary is not even as high as that. So there are a number of pieces to this that I hope, but as I said, selfishly, it was just me trying to collect do my own action research and to find out what people do when they get to these barriers. And so far, I have a few people who have jumped over some barriers and given me inspiration. So
no, that's very good. And I would definitely encourage you to also really, start your own newsletter on LinkedIn, and you can get a lot of subscribers like that. I just started my show here, which you're being part of today. And in early June, I had 0 subscribers, and now I have almost 4,000. So it can definitely blow up on you really quick. And you said something in your podcast that you shared with me that I really agree with. Your book could be somebody else's survival guide. And I thought that was super powerful. I had to steal that, bro. That was really
well, the thing is, it's not mine as well. I heard that from a famous writer, Brené Brown.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So, and for me, it's always worth attributing, and I'm giving the credit to where I heard it.
Sure.
It was from Brené Brown that came from, and that's a powerful way in which to look at putting that book together, saying it can be someone else's survival guide. So I wish I had the ability to create these powerful phrases, but this
you do, my brother. And I appreciate you even sharing that. Like, that's so powerful. And and it's true, right? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, you don't know how, and that's why, to me, it just motivated me to, because I do have another book within me, and obviously it's going to be about my own life, probably, but, I never thought about it in that sense. And that actually motivated me to at least start writing and start putting together the pieces of my own life and what brought me to this point in my life today. So shouts out to you for starting that. And can you give us the name of your show again? What is it?
Your Book, Your Story.
Your Book, Your Story. The podcast by Dr. Megel Barker. We'll definitely put that in the show notes and the links to Spotify and wherever else you're going to actually start.
And I'm getting a lot of energy. It's just a matter of, it works. It's difficult to find the time around work to do stuff. So I'm trying to push through that as a barrier, but I really want to help and learn as well. So
no, that's good. That's real. Like, I mean, even with what I'm doing now with this podcast, I've learned so many skills to be able to, interview and ultimately produce and publish these shows every week. And I've just made the commitment. I think when you're doing a podcast or when you're doing a online show through YouTube, you have to be consistent. And so for me, it's just making sure that I interview at least one amazing K-12 educator every week. And just have that process together. And I don't do it by myself. I'll be fully transparent. I have some people that I've hired through places like Fiverr that, like, as soon as we finish this, I'm going to do some quick edits, and then I'm going to send it to my guy, and he'll put all the bells.
But that's powerful, It's powerful because people, I mean, if you listen to mine, there's someone at the beginning for me and at the ending. Because one of the powerful thing about the world now is that we need to realize that getting good things done doesn't mean you have to do everything.
Oh, 100%.
It doesn't. It still requires a vision. It still requires someone to lead. But some things, why? So, I mean, that is even great to know,
No, that's real true. Like, I think, in order to do something great, you have to have a really good team around you. You know what I mean? Like I have a team. I have a team of guys that help me with my you know, what even the photos that I put on my site, like if you go to my site and look at the photos, like all that was photoshopped by very good editors that photoshopped those copies or those photos. And when you talk about my
You have to.
intro, that was done
You
by,
have to, Joe. You have to.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But everyone, the funny thing is we, the amateurs, so to speak, want to do it themselves, while the professionals know that you don't.
right. Yeah. I mean, and here's the thing. I'll be totally honest. I can do all of them, but you brought up
Yeah.
a very good point. Is that
Time.
the best use of my time? And do I
It's
even
not.
have the
It's
time?
not.
Right.
It's not.
Right. So
But
the
you
one
know,
thing I've just committed to doing is making sure I do the interviews. If I do the interviews, like I'm doing the interview with you right now, if I do my part, then I let my team do the rest of it, and then we're good.
but you know, one of the things that I listen to a number of your interviews, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not all, but I do. Whenever I'm doing anything, I'll just plug in and start listening, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't really watch, I tend to listen
Okay.
because most time I'm doing it,
Yeah.
I'm driving, right? But in all of your interviews, and you've done quite a lot now,
Yeah.
you know, I'm wondering, I'm waiting for the day you say, let us have a look at this and see what we have learned and
Yeah.
put some
Yeah. Yeah.
research together.
That's a good point. That's real good. I never thought about that. And
They're
I'm
all
also,
interviews. They're all
huh?
interviews, and they're all lived experiences of educators. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, they're mainly people of color as well, who are
Sure.
making a name in the field of education. Who's going to tell their story as a group?
Wow. That's powerful. Good point, man.
Because the story is nice to listen one by one,
Yeah.
but the synthesis of that story can make a big difference when you see the challenges that they're facing and how they're dealing with it. There's a story there. There may be a multiple stories,
Right.
but I think it's time now that you have, you know, that thread going through them. It's time to take that thread and embroider it into something powerful.
No, you're right, brother. I mean, you're so right. I agree, man. Thank you for that. That's why I love talking to you, man, because like I said, you definitely always provide me with some thought-provoking questions about whatever I have going on. So yeah, I really appreciate that, man. And also we need to talk about this coaching thing because
There are a few things, yep.
yeah, there's a lot that I want to do and collaborate with you on. So yeah, like I said, man, I'm just grateful that you came on the show today. I know that a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of what you've shared. And I just want to thank you again, man, for being my friend, my brother. And, you know, before you leave, can you give all the people that are watching you right now some parting words of wisdom? Tell us how we can connect with you, and then we'll say goodbye.
All right. So thanks for giving me the chance to be on the show. Obviously, we're good friends, but you know, I'm watching your show and I think there's some real icons, you know, that you're bringing onto your show. And anyone who watches those shows and don't leave fully inspired to go out and just do something great, you know, they need to be checked. It's really some powerful educators and some really dynamic and deep conversations about what people are doing out there in the trenches to make students find success, you know.
Sure.
And you know, it's powerful. At the beginning, you asked me a lot about education and, you know, philosophy and so on. I'm going to share a small story.
Okay.
That has really had an impact on me, you know. And you may find this online in some different places. It's not my story, but I'd like to share it to give you a philosophy about how we're trying to look at education as educators. So the story goes, there's an old man sitting on a park bench. Sitting at the park, he's quite elderly. And while he's sitting there, a young man came up to him and greeted him and said, "Hi, Mr. So-and-so." Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Call him by name, like Mr. Brown. And Mr. Brown said to him, "I don't know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, tell me who you are." And the boy said, "When I was much younger and had a number of flaws in me, I remember one day when I was in your class, you were my teacher.
Wow.
That's how I remember you." And Mr. Brown is like, "Well, I don't know, don't remember you." And he said, "I remember you because one day I stole someone's watch. And we were in the classroom. I saw the watch and I took it. And you asked everyone to the boy complained that he can't find his watch. And you asked the class, do you have the watch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And no one answered because I was ashamed. I knew I had the watch. I knew I was going to be, ostracized, and I really thought I would take it. I thought, why should he have it when I can't have one?
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't say anything. And I remember you saying to us, to all close our eyes and you're going to search us, right? So we all close our eyes. And I remember when you came and you put your hand in my pocket, you took the watch out, but you continued to search.
Wow.
Right? And I said, at the end, you gave the boys watch, but you didn't tell them where you got it. And the man is now explaining to the teacher to say, I want to thank you very much for doing that, because that made me change my ways and I decided to be a good person. And in fact, it made me become a teacher, and I'm now a professor at a university. The old man looked at him and said, I still don't know who took that watch. And the boy said, what? The man said, what do you mean? He said, when I was searching, I closed my eyes also.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
And he said, I did that. And he said, if you have to humiliate someone to correct them, then you're not a teacher.
Wow. That's so powerful, brother.
So that story is something from time to time. It reminds me, sometimes students come to you and it's really tough. And there are many teachers who feel they have to humiliate in order to correct. But if you have to do that, then you're not a teacher. And I want to share that. If people want to connect with me.
That's good, brother.
I'm on Twitter at Mathter, Mather, because I'm a math teacher at heart, still teaches math whenever I get the chance. LinkedIn, I'm available. You'll see me. And as I mentioned before, I'm doing my podcast, very amateur, but learning all the time. But yeah, that's a powerful story for educators, really powerful story.
Your whole story is powerful. I thank you for sharing that story. I thank you for sharing your own personal K-12 journey, and the best is yet to come. We've been doing this 28 years, my brother, but I still feel like for both of us, the best is yet to come. And just keep doing what you're doing, brother. Keep pouring into these young people, and you're making a difference. Just know that.
Thank you, man.
All right, my brother. Take care. All the best to you. All the best to your family, and we'll definitely be in touch. All right.
Take care, man. My regards to your family as well. Some great people. I'll be coming over soon.
Oh yeah, anytime. You know that.